Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Please be seated. Jesus, filled with the power of the Spirit, began to teach. I was reminded several times this past week that we missed taking the time to pray and remember the life, ministry, and fight for justice of Dr. Martin Luther King, whose birthday was celebrated this past Monday. How does that happen? Important moments are forgotten or remembered after the fact. As I sat there during the prayers of the people last week and I heard Bill Hughes pray for Dr. King, I was grateful for his prayer and his remembering and feeling guilty because we had not remembered as we were preparing the service. We can let our lives get so busy that we stop paying attention. When I was thinking about today's sermon and reading about Jesus in the synagogue in Nazareth, I thought, it is never too late to remember. What Dr. King stood for is something that should be remembered every day. What Jesus spoke to, what Dr. King stood for, their words and their actions led them both to their death. Their words and their actions are at the center of who we are called to be as followers of Jesus, as people who are called to live into God's call to love God, to love our neighbor, and to love ourselves. We are called to remember what Jesus said about his mission and ministry. And in light of that call, we are called to step out as King did. We are called to strive for justice and peace among all people, respecting the dignity of every human being. I thought about Dr. King's famous I Have a Dream speech given on August 28th, 1963, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. He was one of several speakers as he called for civil and economic rights and an end to racism. His speech was a compilation of other speech he had already given. As he was nearing the end of his speech that day, singer Mahalia Jackson called out, "Tell them about the dream, Martin." King went off script to speak about his dream. I have a dream that one day, on the hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged for the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream that every day, every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. John Lewis, who also spoke that day, said, Dr. King had the power, the ability, and the capacity to transform those steps on the Lincoln Memorial into a monumental area that will be forever recognized. By speaking the way he did, he educated, he inspired, he informed not just people there, but people throughout America and unborn generations. There were many who heard that speech that day who were not happy with him. There were people who did not agree with nonviolence as the way forward. Yet King kept up his nonviolent stance even as violence in the end took his life. We still have his words and his dream, which continues to speak to us today. When we speak up for those at the edges of society, when we speak up for love, when we speak up for living in community, a beloved community, as King called it, when we speak up for justice and peace, we join others like Dr. King, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, the Zen Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, who died yesterday, and the Dalai Lama, and all those who call for peace and justice. When we join as Christians in this work, I believe we are following the Spirit Jesus followed when he was filled with power to speak in the tiny synagogue of his youth. His words, his own understanding of what he was about, are a call to us to follow in his footsteps, witnessing as we do to God's love, to God's forgiveness, and God's mercy for all. Today's gospel from Luke follows the chapter after Jesus' baptism by John. There, Jesus came out of the water of his baptism and was led into the wilderness by the Spirit. He comes out of the wilderness and the temptations he met there, filled with the power of the Spirit. I can imagine him on fire as he returned to Galilee. People noticed him and began to spread the news about this preacher on fire with the Spirit in the surrounding countryside. Jesus teaches in synagogues and towns along the way. All who heard him praised him. All who encountered him looked at him. Then he came to his hometown, Nazareth. And Luke tells us Jesus goes to the synagogue on the Sabbath. He is known there. This is his hometown. This is the place and community who raised him. He was not a stranger walking into a worship service. They knew him. An attendant would have brought the scroll from where it was kept and handed it to him to read from. There was nothing new or unusual about this. He had been here before, doing this before. Only this time it was different, certainly for those gathered there, and certainly different for Jesus. He opens the scroll and chooses to read from a certain portion of Isaiah. Given the words quoted here, it was most likely Isaiah 61, 1 through 2. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news to the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and release to the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Jesus stops there, rolls up the scroll, and hands it back to the attendant as he sits down. Everyone is looking at him, waiting. Will he say something? And he speaks. Today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. What can he mean? Luke has placed this story at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. In Luke's story, Jesus has not yet moved to Capernaum. Jesus has not yet called his disciples. We will hear next week that his words are met with mixed reviews. There's something about this whole scene, something I sense that as Jesus reads these familiar, ancient words of Isaiah, he is stating what he believes he is called to be, called to do. I wonder how many times he had heard those words before. Clearly, they have come to mean something to him, something that was not there before his dip in the Jordan, before the words, "You are my beloved," before his time in the wilderness. Did he say more that day? Or were the words he said, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled," were those the only words recorded because they resounded so loudly in the hearer's ears? Was his understanding about what he was to do and be, was it new to him? As new as hearing God's voice from a dove's mouth? Imagine saying and believing that he was anointed by the water of his baptism, anointed with the words, "I am well pleased." Imagine the trials of fire, the temptations in the wilderness. Didn't he know then that he would bring good news to the poor, to the oppressed? Who are the oppressed? Who are the poor? Are they only those without food, without shelter? Or are they those who feel poor in spirit? Are they those who have lost their way somehow? And the captives, the prisoners, who are they? Are they only the incarcerated? Or are they also those who find themselves held captive by their fears, imprisoned by their anger? And the blind? Have we ever been blind? How are those scriptures that he quoted fulfilled? They are fulfilled, I believe, by his presence among them, his presence among us. Time slides away into the story as we project ourselves forward to what we know will come next. All of his words and his actions that are yet to happen. We know. And knowing that, we also know the call to do the same. We are anointed in our baptism. We are called to bring good news to the poor. We are called to prepare to proclaim release to the captives. We are called to help in the recovery of sight. We are called to help the oppressed go free. We are called, as Martin Luther King was called, to live God's dream of justice and peace for all. There are two songs that have been just sticking in my head for the last 2 weeks or so. They keep humming there, their words and the music. Their words speak to who we are, where we are, and what we dream. The first is Somewhere. The words by Stephen Sondheim. It is from the musical West Side Story and was sung in the most recent film by Rita Moreno. She was playing a newly created character called Valentina. And as she sang that song, it became for me a song for all who are at the edges, all those who are feeling oppressed, marginalized, brokenhearted, and imprisoned. All those who Jesus came to save. The song tells us there is a place for us. Somewhere a place for us. Peace and quiet and open air. Somewhere a place for us. We'll find a new way of living. We'll find a way of forgiving. Somewhere. Sometime. The second song is When You Walk Through a Storm. It is from the musical Carousel by Rodgers and Hammerstein. Look it up, see what it's sung there. It reminds us that whatever storm we find ourselves in, we never walk alone. Just as Jesus reminds us, we are never alone. When we strive for justice and peace and work for peace in the midst of a community, we do that in the midst of a community, a beloved community. We are never alone. God is with us, and we are there together in that. Amen.